And welcome to today's webinar. My name is Amy Prue, and I'm professor and academic program coordinator at the Canadian Food and Wine Institute at Niagara College, and I'm also the president of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology. Welcome to our webinar today. Oh, someone's got a phone call coming in. Awesome. So on behalf of Food in Canada, Canada's only national food and beverage processing magazine, and CIFST, welcome to our 2021 Table Talks webinar series, The Learning Trough, where we bring you regular webinars that explore the future of food. We've been on a theme on innovation over the past few weeks, and we've got a great topic today. If you haven't already, please visit CIFST's website for a list of upcoming webinars, which will continue every second week until June, and then they'll run again between September and November. If you're a member of CIFST, registration for the entire webinar series is free. Thank you to Dempsey Food for their generous sponsorship for our webinar series. Today's topic is real innovation starting right and restarting right. Our speakers are Sean Conda and Chris Kay of Multiplicity, and that is a Toronto-based corporate innovation consultancy. And let's learn a little bit more about them. I actually got to connect with Sean and Chris because we share that same interest in food innovation. Now, Sean and Chris are innovation specialists. I teach food, but we connected that way, and that's how we were able to get the invitation out to them. So Sean is the head of operations at Multiplicity. He spent over a decade in finance and then left to join an agri-tech company that he helped to fund. He's a multiple co-founder in the verticals of data, machine learning, and emergency management, and he has worked with multiple Fortune 500 clients like Daimler, Merck, Franklin Templeton Investments. He's an innovation mentor at the Toronto Police Service. And Chris Kay is the co-founder and CEO at Multiplicity. And while studying at Ryerson University, Chris was the group manager for the Ryerson Angel Network. He has 10 years experience as a financial analyst at a family office, and then he left to partner with Nissan and Infinity Motors to build and operate their innovation lab in Toronto and Hong Kong. He's a former Techstars mentor and a co-founder of Startup Boost. Before we jump in though, I'm gonna ask a quick icebreaker. So let me switch screens here. Did you take up gardening during the pandemic?
Sean, you go ahead.
Sorry?
Did you take up baking or gardening during the pandemic?
I wish I could. I'm in a little apartment here. Don't have that, but as soon as I get back up north, I plan on planting a lot of trees. So it's in process.
Brilliant.
I am completely inept in the kitchen, but my girlfriend is a wonderful cook, and she actually took up gardening. So we have plants all over our apartment. But unfortunately, we don't have a green space. But my windowsills are filled with plants, and every time she comes home, there's always a couple more plants in the windows.
Brilliant. I'm excited for today's topic because translational innovation is important. I know you're not heavily invested in the food industry, but this is an area where I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I hope we can make some really good connections for you with participants who are here. I like to hear about how innovation's done in other sectors so that we can take those best practices. I'm going to let you take it away, and I will jump in and follow the Q&A chat as we're going along.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, and as we were, discussing before we got started here, yeah, I'm really quite interested in, we're bringing these innovation frameworks that we've, worked with and developed and built in a variety of different industries. And, talking to you, I'm really quite curious to see, how much of this is overlapping of what you're practicing and teaching your students in your program. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, just I don't think there's too much we need to say about Sean and I, other than both of us have very diverse backgrounds. It's funny enough, in prior lives, we both actually started in finance, which gave us kind of special skills about learning different industries quite quickly. And it also gave us kind of a multidisciplinary background. So we're both entrepreneurs by trade. I actually originally started in robotics. Sean started in history and philosophy. We both worked in finance, and we bounced around, and then Sean and I joined up together about 3 years ago. I co-founded Multiplicity, and Sean joined me a few years ago. And so the way we approach our work is we say we take an entrepreneurial approach to corporate innovation. And the idea is that a lot of corporate innovation teams are trying to insulate and protect their businesses, generally traditional businesses, against new tech market emergence. And so what we do is we use the entrepreneurial playbook to apply to corporate innovation. So we are not food scientists. That is not our expertise, but what our expertise is building out innovation frameworks and innovation processes across multiple industries. We've worked in real estate, automotive, financial services. We've worked, in a bunch of different countries, and so it's quite a diverse background. And so what we're bringing today is these innovation frameworks and processes that we've applied in a variety of different industries. No, there we go. So I think, as mentioned in the description of this event, there's actually a lot of value to a formal innovation strategy. According here to PWC and Accenture, there's actually some pretty good results for having a defined innovation strategy. It really goes to say that having a proper innovation process that's clearly mapped out and clearly written out, and I stress that word written, actually does contribute to real growth metrics for the business, and that's been proven out over the last few years. So I want to take a quick second and get a poll from the audience, kind of find out where everybody's at in being able to define a clear strategy inside their own companies. Jack, can you run the poll, please? Okay, interesting. Not too far off from where we originally expected. Definitely, thinking about the food service, or sorry, the food sciences space. New product development obviously is a big one, but looks like there's quite a few people in the group that haven't developed a clear strategy. And brand positioning, you can also see that. That's a pretty common one as well. Okay. All right. Moving on. So I think everybody knows the phrase "plans are worthless, but planning is everything," attributed to Dwight Eisenhower. But there's actually a long history to that concept, and really what it comes down to is the plan itself, isn't the value. It's the planning process where all the value comes in. And really the value in the planning process is thinking through all of the pieces that could potentially happen into the future, but not being actually tied to that plan, because obviously we can't predict the future. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And when we come first contact with either another market participant or an external reality, sometimes those plans fall apart. But there's a lot of value in thinking through the optionality of potentially what might happen. Now, we've developed two frameworks inside the work that we do at Multiplicity, and everybody kind of knows the future forecasting way of thinking. That's the kind of the sexy way of thinking about innovation. Everybody wants to think about the future, what could potentially happen. Let's think about the moonshots, the exciting stuff that can happen, the techno-optimism. But the other side of it is, and this is a reality that we've become quite aware of in the last 12 months or so, is what could happen if things go wrong. And so we actually, Sean and I developed a framework we call it disruption resilience, and it's all about looking at the downside. And as long as you can protect the downside, you can think a little bit more about what the rosy future might look like going forward. This disruption resilience comes from the idea that disruption can actually come from two different places. Everybody is aware of the disruptive innovation. If I was talking about the word disruption about 5 years ago, immediately everybody was thinking about kind of the technology and innovation disruption. Uber versus taxis, Airbnb versus hotels. But now when I say the word disruption, with the last 12 months of the COVID-19 lockdowns, people think about disruptive events. People think about like the Suez Canal blockage. They think about political unrest, or they think about like border disruptions, with the recent Brexit issues. And so it's important to acknowledge that disruption can come both from, new technology, new business models, new innovation, but it can also come from, black swan style events that can disrupt industry operations. To go a little bit deeper into that, as I said, there's new disruptive business models, there's new low-cost entrants in the financial services industry. An example of that is things like robo-advisors, where it's a really cheap competitor that comes in and captures up the bottom end of the market share. There's situations where paradigms have shifted. The old rules no longer apply. That happens in technology pretty often. But under disruptive events, they're falling into the category that can be war, it could be pandemics, political unrest, natural disasters. A couple of most recent events that are affecting the food industry is obviously the Suez Canal backup actually significantly impacted food shipments going through that region. 12% of the global trade actually goes through the Suez Canal. And also rising crop prices. So with different countries actually holding back different types of crops inside their nationalized borders, crop prices actually increased pretty significantly. There's other things like influence on crop prices due to the energy markets. And so all of these external realities can ripple through a business model. And these are external events that can actually affect they can affect the margins, they can affect the product development cycle, and they're things that they can actually affect the end work of a food scientist. So what we try and do is we take kind of three major approaches. So the disruption resilience aspect that we just talked about, the future forecasting that everybody's pretty much aware of, forecasting out, what are the potential optimistic realities. And then we also look at what we call buy versus build, which we'll get to further on in the presentation. And then those three frameworks help us define what innovation objectives need to be. Typical innovation objectives in our experience, we usually find it's either developing new products or services or business models, improving operational efficiency, reducing costs, improving causing cultural transformation or cultural change. That could be a variety of outcomes, or enhancing brand positioning. And enhancing brand positioning can actually go in a couple of different ways. One could be trying to attract new talent to the business. We actually saw that in GE a few years ago when they started getting into the IoT business. Another one could be enhanced brand positioning amongst customers. A couple of other alternative goals we often see are shortening time to market. So that usually goes through which found refining the innovation process. We'll talk about in a few minutes around executive air cover, securing alignment with other business units or other teams inside the business, and then developing a repeatable process for new product innovation. Things we've heard before is where say a new product or service is launched, or a new pilot or project is launched, and it becomes successful. It's very hard to determine what the cause of that success was, and so therefore it's very difficult to actually define how to replicate it and how to do it again. After defining those innovation objectives, that actually allows us to be able to figure out what the innovation activities need to look like. So one of the problems that we often find is companies will rush out to self-prescribing that they need to build an incubator, they need to build an accelerator, they need to run hackathons, or they need to build a venture capital arm. But that's a hammer looking for a nail. And in reality, what they need to do is be able to define the objectives first, and then find the right activity that satisfies those objectives. To give you an example, if an objective was around creating operational efficiency, maybe that's adopting new technologies in a manufacturing process, and therefore running pilots or proof of concepts with external technology providers. And so the objective drives the activity. So when we work with companies, we usually break down the elements of an innovation strategy into the 6 major buckets. So first is defining the objectives, as we just discussed, defining the strategy as well. We usually break these down into a 3-year roadmap. So the big thing there is, the first year of working through an innovation program is really just kind of figuring it out. It's getting the foundation set up. And there's a lot of leeway for making mistakes in the first year. The problem is that by the second year, most of the kinks should be worked out in the process. And by the end of the second year, there needs to be some kind of material results that you can go back and show the executive team. We often find, a COO or a CFO is usually very skeptical about approving a budget going into a third year unless there's some clearly definable measurements of success. They don't have to be completely financial, but definitely there has to be something to show for the budget by the end of the second year to be able to get the budget renewed. And so a 3-year roadmap is really important, that it's short enough that it provides a little bit of agility into the program, but it's long enough that it gives a clear roadmap for what needs to be accomplished. And not to say that every single objective needs to be accomplished all in the 3 years. In 1 year, it might be about getting a foundation set up. In the second year, it might be about refining process and improving efficiency. And by the third year, it might be about generating financial results. So each year might actually tackle, the activities of each year might actually tackle different objectives. So then the innovation activities is actually completely separate from the strategy and the objectives. The innovation activities is what are you actually going to do day to day? What does the programming look like to actually satisfy those objectives? And as I said, it could be building an innovation lab. It could be building hackathons. It could be developing products internally. It could be going out and looking for M&A or partnering with external partners. And then defining the innovation activities is also about defining the workflow. So how do you interact with other business units? How do you interact with the procurement department, the IT department, the compliance department? How do you make decisions? How do you measure risk tolerance? And these are actually things we'll dive into a little bit deeper further on. What resources are required? So, who needs to be in what role? How much time do they need to commit? What budgets are necessary to be able to either run projects or to commit the right people to the project? Two of the really big things we notice are missing are communication strategy and measurement. So, and when we say communication strategy, we don't mean PR or press releases. What we mean is being able to communicate process, communicate decision-making, communicate successes to internally and externally. So it's not just about raising the brand profile of the company externally and saying, hey, look, we're so innovative, look at what we've done. It's also communicating internally and giving other internal business units comfort and transparency into what the innovation objectives are. And then measuring results is often a thing that gets missed. We notice very little effort goes into measuring. But that measurement is really important. And again, we'll get into this a little bit deeper, but that measurement can be both quantifiable and, quantitative and qualitative, in determining success. So Jack, we can run the next poll.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here, Chris, we see a lot of companies out there that really they're motivated to do something in this space, but there is no plan. It's all very willy-nilly. And what happens is things get very messy, things get dropped, and we see a lot of very good intentions fail along the way, and then it takes years to build up the political capital in order to try it again. So having an actual, as Chris said, written strategy is very important for long-term, midterm and long-term success.
Okay. So the part of this poll that I find really interesting is the in progress. So I'm really hoping that there's something valuable in this presentation for the people who are in the middle of writing their innovation strategy. And hopefully you guys will have some further questions later on. We'll be able to do some Q&A in about 10 minutes to be able to help out on that. Okay. So given it pretty theoretical thus far, so let's actually dig into the meat. So a decision-making framework. Now, one of the important aspects of putting together these innovation strategies or innovation frameworks is around decision making. And one of the common problems that we end up finding is that no clear process is written down and agreed to on how decisions of projects or new products is set up. And so what happens is usually delay. It's delay because another business unit can change their mind on what priorities are. A risk-averse business unit like the CFO can decide that they don't want to commit capital or they don't want to commit resources. And usually what ends up happening is the people who are pushing for these new projects usually get frustrated. And so we find it incredibly important to set a decision-making framework as early as possible and have everybody agree upon it. And one of the key elements is balancing speed versus risk. So, you know, as I said before earlier, one of the major objectives we find is people want to get product to market as quickly as possible. However, other business units inside the company, for instance, the compliance department or the risk department or the legal department, want to ensure that there isn't any undue risk because of uncertainty, because creating new things, it's always uncertain. So one of the things we recommend is work with the compliance team, a legal team, risk team, to be able to set a one-page document setting out guidelines for parameters of risk. So if it's a new prototype project, or sorry, a new prototype product, you know, what is the threshold for customers who could be affected by it, meaning how many customers can you show this to? What is a dollar liability that they're willing to accept or a cost that they're willing to accept? So that these projects can get run through a sandbox as quickly as possible with the least amount of with an acceptable amount of risk. And so having a decision up front about that and then staying within those guidelines can actually get projects to market much faster without actually having to go to the legal department and asking for permission every single time. The next is defining who is the decision maker. So that's often the person who has the authority over the budget, but also how do they make decisions? So what is the criteria that's going to be used at each stage? Because you're going to have different stage gates. Is there a benchmark or a threshold for how they need to make the decisions? If a return on investment is over a certain threshold, is it an automatic yes? If it's underneath a certain threshold, is it an automatic no? Those things should get set up ahead of time so that when projects, you know, get to a decision gate, other departments aren't able to, you know, pull back and say, oh, we don't think this is important, or, you know, we don't think, you know, this project looks too risky, because the decision-making framework was agreed upon ahead of time. One of the things we've noticed actually in a couple of businesses is asking the theoretical question, you know, what aspects of the timeline are determined by the laws of physics and what are determined by internal processes of politics? A financial services business that we've worked with in the past noticed during the beginning of the COVID stay-at-home orders, they noticed that their management teams started becoming a higher risk appetite to running technology pilots. And so the interesting learning for their innovation team is that there were a bunch of artificial roadblocks created in the past about running these technology pilots. And when the managers were actually forced, you know, they got their budget slapped and they're forced to do more with less, a lot of those artificial roadblocks were pulled away. Risk appetite for experimentation went up. And they realized that a lot of those roadblocks were actually not real physical roadblocks, but or structural roadblocks. They were artificial. Another important thing is have a portfolio of cheap experiments. There's two pieces to this. One is in experimentation, you're probably going to be wrong more than you're right. So therefore, a portfolio approach is needed. If you're only running one or two experiments, you're going to be wrong quite a bit, and then you got to go back to the drawing board. And running cheap experiments. So if you're wrong, which is going to be quite often, you're wrong by a little, and you want to be able to double down on your winners. So being able to have a stage-gated process, a diversified portfolio of very inexpensive experiments is the best way to be able to reduce risk and spread risk around, and which will generally make other business units and the executive team far more comfortable with the experimentation process. Measuring results. I think it's really important to state that, you know, measuring results is both qualitative and quantitative. immediately everybody jumps to the quantitative aspect, what is the financial ROI? But the qualitative side of it is what is the organizational knowledge that's been accumulated? So it's important to remember that there's information in both failure and success. And when that failure happens, what did we learn from it? And it's important to document that. It's important to document those learnings. Sean and I often like to think of product development teams and R&D teams and innovation teams as kind of like a learning team. And this is a place where experiments are run, things are learned, and organizational knowledge is accumulated and documented. And then that documentation, or that organizational knowledge needs to be shared across the company. One of the tools at the disposal for qualitative measurement is it's called innovation accounting, which can be paired with metered funding or stage gate funding. So what innovation accounting does is essentially it's about, instead of measuring financial return like ROI or customers or revenue, it's about measuring other metrics that maybe aren't financially driven. So things like from a marketing campaign, opens or clicks, web traffic, primary customer feedback through customer testing, looking at conversion rates through web traffic to email traffic, or people providing contact information, or looking for referral rates or NPS scores. The way that those innovation accounting kind of metrics need to be set up is specifically around leap of faith assumptions. So these are the most risky assumptions about launching a new product or launching a new project. So what's the biggest thing that could cause this project to fail? What's the biggest assumption underpinning this project from being successful? And test that first. And if you can test the leap of faith assumption or the most risky assumption and be successful, odds are that the other ones will be successful as well. By getting the most risky assumption out of the way first, you decrease the risk of finding failure later down the road. And then combining innovation accounting with metered funding or stage gate funding allows to reduce the risk of creating new projects, new products by metering out funding or slowly dripping out funding as the project goes through different gates. And so therefore, if the project does become a failure, the amount of financial risk is actually quite small. And then just the innovation accounting, one of the tools to use that is called a growth board. Essentially, it's just a table. Listed down the y-axis is the different metrics that you're trying to track, and across the x-axis is a weekly measurement. And so you're just measuring across what the different metrics are from week to week, being able to show growth or improvement across those metrics. And communication, as I mentioned before, communication of innovation projects or new product development is such a missed part of the practice, and it's really quite unfortunate. Again, as I said, this isn't just about doing press releases to the external world, telling them that your company is being innovative, or that your company is just partnered with a sexy startup. It's about also communicating internally to both the leadership and to the other business units about what the objectives are, what the priorities are, what the process looks like, how decisions are being made. It's about communicating case studies and learnings. And one of the big issues we find is R&D teams and innovation teams are a bit of a black box, and the rest of the organization doesn't really know what they're working on, what they're doing, or how they're prioritizing their time. And it's really important to be able to communicate those. One, to be able to get buy-in with other teams when you need to collaborate with them, and two, to be able to find allies inside the company who are interested in bringing solutions or bringing ideas to the table. And also the other part is one of the things we advocate for is bringing in other stakeholders as early as possible. This is so important for political reasons. We often find projects will get blocked by stakeholders because politically it wasn't their idea, and they'll either have political capital as to why they don't want it to happen. It wasn't their idea. They don't want to back it, There's also other political reasons why a person might be backing another piece of technology, another solution provider, another vendor, another strategy. And by getting them brought in early and bringing them in as part of the decision-making process and the project scoping process, it actually creates buy-in. We do recommend, especially for interfacing with an executive team, a frequency of somewhere between every 6 weeks to every 3 months. So 3 months at the absolute infrequent. And we really don't see a lot of value in interfacing with an executive team any more than every 6 weeks. And if we were on the last poll,
Chris, I'm wondering when you think I should start my interpretive dance.
if you give me about 3 minutes, I think I only got 2 or 3 slides left.
Usually for everyone here, that's usually my role in these calls. So I'm just understanding timing, that's all.
Okay, cool. Again, another interesting poll. Interesting. In progress is 25%. It's just from a kind of professional perspective, it's always interesting to see what kind of maturity some companies are at, and seeing how proactive they've been in formalizing some of these processes. So I appreciate that the audience here is coming from a food science background, which is generally done by R&D teams in-house. Oops, there we go. There we go. But we at Multiplicity, we kind of have an internal ethos of, we call it buy versus build. Now, it doesn't perfectly fit with this audience, and that's just fine, but we do find a lot of value in partnering with external, and we say scale up specifically. And just in preparing for this this session, doing a little bit of research, there's actually some really exciting technologies happening specifically in the food supply chain space, and one of the interesting things that's happening is a lot of visibility in being able to do demand forecasting in food supply chain. So not just your typical Nielsen customer insights, but actually being able to look at real-time data of how food is moving through the supply chain for producers to refining, to manufacturing, packaging, to retail, and even logistics in between, and being able to glean insights from that data about almost real-time customer demand. One of the things actually we were talking about before we got started in this session is what a lot of people noticed during the first kind of COVID stay-at-home orders was, a lot of food wasn't showing up on retail shelves, and it wasn't necessarily an issue around food production. It was the issue around multi-channel packaging. And so there's some pretty interesting ideas around being able to agile adjust packaging lines, and be able to get kind of real-time information about what types of food people are purchasing and what kind of consumer tastes look like. So especially lately, we're seeing a lot of interesting opportunities to adopt new technology, to be able to either shorten the product life cycle, get better customer insights, or actually adjust the manufacturing process. One thing I will say about this, and I'm very specific about this word scale ups, and it's a word that gets thrown around the technology space a lot. We really think it's important to partner with if we use the term startup, later stage startups. And there's a really specific reason is a company underneath a certain size, and I'm going to say, 10 to 20 people, probably doing, anything less than $1 million a year in revenue, probably doesn't have their infrastructure together enough to be able to properly partner with a large enterprise. They probably won't make it through a procurement process or a legal process. They're probably still figuring out a lot of their product development, and a lot of those projects fall down. We use the term scale up, larger than 10 to 20 people, more than $1 million a year in revenue, probably has raised a couple of $1 million. Definitely institutional investor backing. Those are the types of companies that are they're enterprise tested. They'll be able to get through a legal procurement process. They've got proper capital in place that they will be able to maintain a technology stack going forward, for a long period of time, and they're far less risky to work with. This is a proprietary process that we created over about 4 years of developing pilots between large enterprise and startups. It's kind of an amalgamation between the scientific method, design thinking, lean manufacturing, and traditional procurement and agile procurement. And really what it boils down to is properly researching the problem statement or the pain, going out and sourcing the solutions. A lot of companies get that backwards. They'll go out and find a solution and then try and find a problem for it. That usually doesn't go anywhere. Then what we do is we usually do a 2 or 3 week sprint cycle, or sorry, actually, then there's the pilot contracting phase. We call it collaborative scoping because the process that we use is we bring the scale up and the innovation team or the R&D team to the table and collaboratively scope out a pilot together. That way there's faster agreement instead of just putting out an RFP. A lot of this process actually replicates the traditional procurement process and RFP process. And then when we actually do delivery, we do a 2 to 3 week sprint cycle, and then match payment to that sprint cycle. And so there's a 2 to 3 week delivery, there's payment, there's another scope, there's a 2 to 3 week delivery payment. And what that does is it increases the speed of delivery, but it also shortens down the risk so that, a lot of money isn't paid out to a startup that, that end up can't deliver. And then always we do a post-project review. Not only do we review the actual project itself and did it achieve the objectives that was set out at the beginning, but also we review the process that was used and then we refine the process from there. It's really important at the beginning of the collaborative scoping process to be able to define the objectives of what does success look like at the end of the project, so that at the end you can actually go and see whether those objectives were achieved or not. And just a handy little checklist is something we put together over the last little bit. If you're going to go and partner with an external company, here's some kind of off the hand thoughts. Number one, is the problem number 1, 2, or 3 priority? We've seen this too many times where we talk to business units and they give us a problem statement. We go out and find a solution and come back and it's problem number 8, and they say that that's just not a big enough priority for me to put time on it. Make sure that the root problem is actually being identified and not just a symptom of the problem. It's like going to your doctor and saying you need a painkiller when your knee hurts. You don't want to find out why your knee hurts, just not covered up with a painkiller. Have you brought in all the internal and external stakeholders? Again, as I mentioned before, the political issues of somebody could probably roadblock the project if they feel differently. Have all boundaries and constraints and dependencies been identified? Could be things like accessing a company data lake. It could be a budget boundary. It could be a timeline boundary. Project needs to get done by X date because everybody's going to go on vacation. Has the value hypothesis been tested? Meaning, if you implement this project, is it creating the right value that you're expecting? Again, what does success look like? Which is also number 6. What are the resources required? What's the budget? Who needs to be involved? How long is it going to take? And then lastly, is this partner a scale up? Are they enterprise ready? Are they going to be able to get through the procurement or the IT, compliance, legal, and risk processes? And that's everything for us. So Amy, do you want to have a little chat?
Yeah, I'm back. And now we can do interpretive dancing.
There we go.
Honestly, the buy versus build question is really fascinating to me. One, because in 2 weeks' time, we're going to have Mavis McRae, who is, if I can use the term, a buy versus build person. She is the Director of Innovation Research at the Center for Food Innovation at Red River College, and it is one of those buy versus build scenarios. But and so that will be a topic that comes forward. I was really surprised at some of the poll numbers. especially given how important culture transformation is within a lot of companies. I know that a friend to CIFST, her name is Lone Jesperson, and she is the founder of Cultivate Food Safety, has expressed a lot of work about food safety culture and that aspect that innovation practice is not just, it's not just about making a new product, but it could be about making a new service, making a new delivery system. And so I'm curious, do you have any insights of why the hesitancy on cultural change?
Well, culture is a really hard thing to change, and it takes years. In our experience, it can take somewhere 2 to 3 years to actually even start chipping away at an existing culture. And I'm sure everybody's aware that, there's a stated culture and then there's a lived culture. And so a stated culture is the thing that goes up on the wall, on the posters, that says that we're all about, customer satisfaction. And then the lived culture is actually what people do day to day and how they're rewarded and how they're compensated and how they're incentivized. And we do find in a lot of companies that those things are disconnected. And so it's important that, the culture is stated accurately and honestly to what it actually is lived. And if those two things, if there's a discrepancy between the two, that, one of them has to change. Either there has to be more honesty around stated, or they have to have some kind of cultural change. But yeah, we work with companies, and it's probably a good 2-year process, sometimes a 3-year process to chip away, at the mainstream employee base. Thousands of employees. You'll obviously see early adopters that'll jump right in, who'll be really excited about it, but it takes a while to proliferate. One of the most interesting things I've seen is when the CFO, and this actually happened in one of the companies, the CFO came down from his ivory tower and came down to one of the labs we were working in and said, "How do I get involved?" And that's the moment that we knew that we had built something that was sustainable, when the CFO bought in. But yeah, and culture, like things like climate change, is not a one-all. There's no silver bullet to it. It's quite a complex thing to solve. Sorry, Sean.
Yeah, if I could jump in, but even in that case, in that scenario, then you have reorgs, company reorgs, and that CFO is no longer CFO anymore, and then you don't have your champion again. Even more than that, it's changing muscle memory in large institutions is extremely hard. Like we have lots of conversations in the financial services industry where they bring agile coaches in and they stand behind people and say, "Be more agile," and then they walk, coach walks away, PWC walks away, and then they revert back to the old way of doing things. Again, it goes to as Chris said, how you reward people. I mean, one of our largest clients in the real estate space just put innovation activities on their bonus card. So, you have to reward people to this. You have to have the executive champion. You have to have like a cohesive certain period of time, like Chris said, 3 years minimum with the same champions in the same positions in order to drive this thing, or this can easily fall down.
And I'll add one thing. It's also, people need to feel relatively safe that things might not go to plan. So if someone feels like they're going to get fired because they didn't hit all of the objectives, or the project didn't go the way it was supposed to go, or multiple projects didn't go the way it's supposed to go, again, there's value, there's information in failure and success, and that needs to be understood. And if there's a culture that punishes failure, then there's no room for experimentation, because a lot of experiments fail. That's the entire point of experimentation. And so people don't feel comfortable that they can experiment freely. Obviously, you don't want to rush towards failure. I'm not saying celebrate failure. I'm saying not punish it. And that's really important. So yeah, that there has to be an incentive, but there also have to make sure that the stick isn't too big either.
I'm checking to see if we've got questions coming in from the audience before I bombard you with more, because obviously this is a topic that I find exciting. That buy versus build scenario too is interesting from a mergers and acquisition perspective. We've seen this transition in consumer packaged goods in Canada, where I want to say the transformation started with the Dragon's Den phenomenon, where through television, the power of television, we saw the shift in venture capital towards food manufacturing, and that startup entrepreneurship became sexy. And then the big companies watch these small companies and snatch them up, the buy element of that buy versus build. Where is that space going? Is venture capital going to be where innovation is occurring?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one, because I think it was Johnson & Johnson actually had an M&A that was blocked by I think it was the FTC a couple of weeks ago. And so, there's a big question, especially in the CPG, so not quite food, but in the CPG space, it's controlled by so many large, conglomerates, like, Procter & Gamble, Colgate-Palmolive, J&J. They're just, Nestle is another great example. They're just so big that if they continue to, move forward with M&A, they suck up all the competition of smaller companies. And so I actually think there's going to be more scrutiny, especially in the US, around the larger conglomerates acquiring smaller competition, because it doesn't create that room. But yeah, I think the new creation, the new innovation is definitely going to be coming from smaller companies, especially the direct-to-consumer brands. I mean, we saw it a few years ago with companies like Dollar Shave Club, got bought by, I think there was $3 billion. And these direct-to-consumer brands are really putting a lot of the conglomerates up, up on the balls of their heels, or sorry, the balls of their feet. And they're also, these, direct-to-consumer brands were also really challenging the established distribution channels of retailers. So if you think about, like, the Walmarts and the Loblaws of the world, their big value is controlling consumer distribution, and companies that are direct to consumer and really challenge that distribution model and challenge that competitive advantage. So I think we're going to see a lot there. I think it's where 10 years ago it was significantly cheaper to create a software company. You can get a software company off the ground for $1,000 in a weekend. It's becoming increasingly inexpensive to create a physical product, especially in the consumer space, and getting it off the ground. Buying Instagram ads and TikTok ads, and you can promote consumer brands so much more easily than you could 10 years ago.
And the distribution networks are so much more agile that you can put up an e-commerce platform just like that, have your product out the door in next to no time. It's such a fascinating time and space to be in the food industry. And it's, with COVID and all of the inflections that have occurred, the food industry has been a fantastic place from an employment perspective, that we're still growing. We need food more than ever. Watching the time and respecting that many of our viewers need to get back to work. I do want to thank our guests, Sean and Chris, and on behalf of the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology and Food in Canada magazine, we are very grateful for your very informative presentation. Just a reminder to our friends in the audience, you are very welcome to reach out to us at CIFST if you have more questions, and we'd be glad to connect you with Sean and Chris to find out opportunities to build more synergy in the conversation. Just a reminder, we are hosting webinars every second Wednesday until June, and then we'll start again in September to November. Our next webinar is on Wednesday, April 28th, and we will feature Mavis McRae and Heather Hill from the Prairie Research Kitchen at Red River College, pardon me. Their presentation is Applied Culinary Research in Action, and great ideas start in the kitchen. Registration is open on our website, and for those of you who are interested in that buy versus build conversation, the technology access centers are a perfect example of that scenario. So thank you again to Sean and Chris. This has been fantastic. We really thank all of our participants for attending, and we'd like to encourage you to enjoy the rest of your day and keep on innovating.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks for having us, Amy. Take care.